Marcus stood at the edge of the rooftop party, watching his girlfriend of 2 years laugh with her friends as she pointed at his paint-stained jeans. "Can you believe he showed up like this?" Victoria's voice carried over the music. "I told him this was a formal event, and he comes dressed like he just crawled out of some artist's commune. It's like he doesn't even try anymore. Honestly, I don't know why I put up with it." The champagne glass in Marcus's hand, filled with water because he'd never developed a taste for champagne despite being able to buy the vineyard, trembled slightly. He'd worn the paint-stained clothes on purpose, testing a theory he'd been afraid to confirm for months. Now he had his answer. "You should dump him," Victoria's friend Clarissa said, not bothering to lower her voice. "You're Victoria Ashford. Your family owns half of Manhattan. You could have anyone. Why settle for some nobody who can barely afford rent?" Marcus set down his glass and walked over to the group. Victoria's smile faltered when she saw him approaching, but she quickly recovered, sliding her arm through his with practiced affection that didn't reach her eyes. "There you are, darling," she said, her tone syrupy sweet. "We were just talking about your artistic pursuits." "I heard," Marcus said quietly. "Every word, actually." The group fell silent. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails dug into his arm, a warning. But Marcus was done with warnings, done with pretending, done with everything except finding out the truth he'd suspected all along. "I think we should talk," Marcus said. "Privately." Victoria's laugh was like breaking glass. "Oh, Marcus. Don't be so dramatic. It's a party. We can talk later." "Now," Marcus said, gently but firmly extracting his arm from her grip. They ended up in a corner of the terrace, the city lights spreading below them like scattered diamonds. Victoria crossed her arms, her designer dress catching the light. Marcus remembered when he'd bought her that dress, how she'd squealed with delight until she saw the price tag and assumed it was a rental. "What's this about?" Victoria asked, impatience creeping into her voice. "Us," Marcus said simply. "Or rather, the lack of us." Victoria rolled her eyes. "Are you really going to make a scene because of a little joke?" "God, Marcus, you're so sensitive. It's not attractive." "It wasn't a joke, though, was it?" Marcus said. "You meant every word. I embarrass you. You think you're settling." "You stay with me because I love you," Victoria interrupted, but the words rang hollow. Marcus pulled out his phone, opened his banking app, and showed her the screen. The number displayed there had more zeros than most people would see in several lifetimes. Victoria's eyes widened, then narrowed in confusion. "What is this? Some kind of app glitch?" "It's my actual bank balance," Marcus said calmly. "Well, one of my accounts. The trust fund alone is worth more than your father's entire real estate portfolio." Victoria laughed nervously. "That's not funny, Marcus." Marcus switched to another app, showing her corporate documents. "Nexus Technologies, founded 5 years ago. Current valuation, $43 billion. CEO, Marcus Chen. That's me, by the way. My actual last name is Chen, not the Smith I've been using." Victoria's face went pale, then red, then pale again. You're joking. You have to be joking." "The penthouse apartment you think I can't afford? I own the entire building. The beat-up Toyota I drive? I have 12 cars in storage, including a Bugatti I've driven exactly once. The struggling artist routine? I paint because I love it, not because I need to sell anything to survive." But why?" Victoria's voice cracked. "Why would you lie to me?" Marcus almost laughed at the irony. "I didn't lie. I just didn't correct your assumptions. You met me at that gallery, saw the paint on my clothes, heard I was an artist, and immediately categorized me as a charming but ultimately unsuitable bohemian adventure. I wanted to see if you could love me without the money. I got my answer. That's not... I do love you, Victoria protested, reaching for his hands. Marcus, this is wonderful. We can be together properly now. My family will be thrilled. We can... We're done, Victoria, Marcus said quietly, stepping back. This was a test, and you failed it spectacularly. You tested me? Victoria's voice rose sharply. You pretended to be poor to test me? That's sick. That's manipulative. Maybe, Marcus agreed. But it's also revealing. You've spent 2 years treating me like a charity case you were embarrassed to be seen with. You made jokes about my little paintings. You introduced me to your friends as your artist phase. The only thing that's changed in the last 5 minutes is you finding out about my money. That's not true. I was protecting you. My world, these people, they're harsh. I didn't want them to hurt you. Marcus shook his head. You were protecting yourself. From the embarrassment of dating beneath your social status. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I really did love you. I loved the woman I thought you were when we were alone, when you forgot to perform for everyone. But that woman doesn't really exist, does she? She was just another role you played. Marcus, wait! Victoria called after him, but he was already walking away. Enjoy the party, Marcus said over his shoulder. I'll have someone collect my things from your apartment tomorrow. As he reached the elevator, he could hear Victoria's friends gathering around her, their voices a mixture of shock and excitement. The gossip would spread through their social circle within hours. By tomorrow, everyone would know that Victoria Ashford had dumped a billionaire because she thought he was poor. Marcus smiled grimly as the elevator descended. He'd lost a girlfriend, but he'd gained something more valuable. Confirmation that his instincts had been right. The money always changed everything. It turned love into transaction, affection into calculation, genuine connection into strategic alliance. 3 days later, Marcus sat in his real office, the one Victoria had never seen, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, preparing for an interview with Tech World magazine. His assistant knocked and entered. Mr. Chen, the reporter is here. Also, there's been an incident. Marcus looked up from his computer. What kind of incident? Miss Ashford is in the lobby. Security stopped her, but she's making quite a scene. She says she's your girlfriend and demands to see you. Marcus sighed. Tell security to escort her out. If she returns, they should call the police. Yes, sir. Also, the interview will be broadcast live on Channel 7's business segment. Hair and makeup will be here in 20 minutes. Marcus nodded, already forgetting about Victoria as he focused on the upcoming interview. It would be his first major media appearance in over a year, discussing Nexus's revolutionary new AI platform. The technology would change how businesses operated globally, and he was genuinely excited to talk about it. An hour later, Marcus sat across from Jennifer Walsh, one of the most respected tech journalists in the industry. The cameras were rolling, broadcasting live to millions of viewers. Marcus Chen, Jennifer began. At 32, you've built one of the most valuable tech companies in the world, yet you maintain an incredibly low profile. Why is that? Marcus smiled slightly. I prefer to let the work speak for itself. The technology we're developing at Nexus has the potential to revolutionize how we interact with artificial intelligence. That's what matters, not my personal life. But your personal life is quite interesting, Jennifer pressed. You're known for your art collection, your philanthropic work, and yet you live relatively simply for someone of your wealth. No yacht, no private jet, no sprawling mansion. I have what I need, Marcus said. Excess for the sake of excess has never appealed to me. I'd rather invest in innovation and giving back to communities that need it. Speaking of giving back, let's talk about your latest initiative, funding art programs in underprivileged schools. As Marcus launched into discussing the program, he had no idea that across town, Victoria Ashford was sitting in her apartment, staring at the television in shock. She'd been channel surfing, nursing a glass of wine and her wounded pride, when she'd landed on the business segment. There was Marcus, her Marcus, except he looked completely different. Gone were the paint-stained jeans and worn t-shirts. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than she'd thought he made in a year. He spoke with confidence and authority about billion-dollar deals and global technology initiatives. "This can't be real," Victoria whispered, grabbing her phone and frantically Googling Marcus Chen Nexus Technologies. The results flooded her screen. Articles from Forbes, Fortune, The Wall Street Journal. The reclusive billionaire behind the tech revolution. Marcus Chen, the $43 billion mystery man. From MIT dropout to tech titan, the Marcus Chen story. Her phone slipped from numb fingers as the full weight of what she'd lost hit her. She'd had it all, everything she'd ever wanted, and she'd thrown it away because she couldn't see past her own prejudices. On screen, Jennifer Walsh was asking Marcus about his personal life. "You're notably private about your relationships. Are you seeing anyone?" Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I recently ended a relationship, actually. It taught me something valuable about the importance of being seen for who you really are, not what you represent or what you can provide." "That sounds like a story," Jennifer prompted. "Perhaps," Marcus said, "but not one for today. What I will say is that authenticity in relationships is rare and precious. When someone loves you without knowing about your success, your wealth, your status, that's when you know it's real. The challenge is finding someone who can see past all the noise to the person underneath." Victoria felt the words like a physical blow. He'd been looking for exactly what she claimed to offer: real love, genuine connection, and she'd failed him completely. Her phone buzzed with incoming texts. Her friends had found the interview. The messages ranged from shock to mockery to barely concealed glee at her misfortune. She could already imagine the whispers at the next charity gala, the pointed looks, the cruel laughter behind manicured hands. She tried calling Marcus, but the number she had was disconnected. She tried his email, but it bounced back. Even his social media profiles, the ones she'd secretly mocked for having so few followers, had vanished. Over the next weeks, Victoria watched as the story exploded across social media. Someone had been at the rooftop party and overheard their breakup. The story of the billionaire who pretended to be poor and the socialite who dumped him for it became viral sensation. Memes sprouted overnight. Late-night comedians made jokes. She became a cautionary tale about superficiality and greed. Her father was furious. "Do you have any idea what you've cost us?" he raged. "The connections, the opportunities." "Marcus Chen's company is developing technology that could have transformed our real estate business. And you threw it away because you thought he was beneath you?" Victoria tried to salvage things. She showed up at Nexus Technologies headquarters, but security turned her away. She tried to leverage mutual connections, but Marcus had seemingly vanished from their social circle entirely. She even went to the gallery where they'd met, hoping to find him there. But the owner just shook her head sadly. "He hasn't been back," the gallery owner said. "Shame, really. He bought more pieces from unknown artists than anyone else. Always paid asking price or more, never haggled. I thought he was just a generous soul who understood the struggle. Turns out he was a billionaire who remembered where he came from." Meanwhile, Marcus had thrown himself into his work, trying to forget the hollow feeling Victoria had left behind. Not because he missed her. He'd realized their relationship had been built on sand. but because the experience had confirmed his worst fears about finding genuine connection in his world. He was in his private studio one evening, painting to clear his mind, when his phone rang. His assistant rarely called after hours unless it was urgent. "Mr. Chen, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's a situation. A woman named Sophie Martinez has been trying to reach you. She says she knows you, but not as Marcus Chen. She knows you as Marcus Smith, and she's concerned because you've disappeared." Marcus froze, paintbrush suspended in midair. Sophie. He'd met her at a small coffee shop near the gallery 3 weeks before the breakup with Victoria. She was an art teacher at a community college, genuine and warm, and completely unimpressed by wealth or status, because she didn't have any herself. They'd talked for hours about art, about life, about the search for authenticity in a world full of facades. He'd been drawn to her immediately, but forced himself to keep distance because of Victoria. After the breakup, he'd been too raw, too cynical to reach out. But she'd been looking for him? "Give her my direct number," Marcus said impulsively. "The private one." Within minutes, his phone rang. Sophie's voice was exactly as he remembered, warm but direct, no pretense. "Marcus, or should I say Mr. Chen? I saw the interview. I was worried when you just vanished from the gallery scene. That's not like you." "You're not upset that I didn't tell you who I really was?" Marcus asked. Sophie laughed. "Why would I be? We've had exactly 3 conversations, all about art and philosophy. You never lied to me. You never pretended to be anything other than a man who loves painting. The fact that you also run a tech empire doesn't change the way you talked about Monet's use of light." Marcus found himself smiling for the first time in weeks. "Would you like to have a 4th conversation? Maybe over coffee? I know a place. Nothing fancy, but they make their own pastries." "The same place you took that woman? The one in the viral video who dumped you for being poor?" Sophie's tone was teasing, but kind. "Yeah, I did my research. That must have hurt." "It was clarifying," Marcus said carefully. "I bet it was. Sure, I'll meet you for coffee. But I'm buying my own, just so we're clear. I don't want any confusion about why I'm there." They met the next afternoon at a small cafe neither had been to before, neutral territory. Sophie arrived in paint-splattered jeans and a vintage band t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked exactly like herself, and Marcus realized that was extraordinarily rare in his world. "So," Sophie said, stirring sugar into her coffee. Real sugar, not agave or stevia or any of the substitutes his world preferred. "Tell me the truth. Why does a billionaire pretend to be a struggling artist?" Marcus considered lying, spinning some noble story about testing people or finding himself. But something about Sophie's direct gaze made him want to be honest. "Because I'm lonely," he admitted. "The money, the company, the success. It all creates walls. People see the bank account, not the person. They see opportunities, not connection. I started going to galleries as just Marcus, no last name, no corporate title, because I wanted to have real conversations about something I actually care about." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. But you know what? You're doing it backwards." "What do you mean?" "You're trying to hide who you are to find someone who likes the real you. But that's just another form of deception. The real you includes being wealthy. It includes running a company. You can't separate those parts any more than I can separate being a teacher from who I am." Marcus sat back, struck by the simple truth of her words. "I never thought of it that way. The question isn't whether someone can love you without the money," Sophie continued. "It's whether someone can love you with it, without the money being the reason why. Those are 2 very different things. And how do you tell the difference?" Sophie smiled. "Time, consistency. Paying attention to what someone values, what they talk about, what excites them? Your ex? From what I saw in that video, she was excited by status, by appearances, by what you could do for her social standing. The money would have just been another accessory to her. And what excites you? Marcus asked. Creating something from nothing. Teaching a student who's never held a paintbrush to express themselves through art. Finding beauty in unexpected places. Really good coffee and really bad movies. Conversations that make me think differently. She paused. Also, dogs. I get really excited about dogs. Marcus laughed, really laughed, for the first time since the breakup. I have 2 dogs, rescues. They live at my actual house, not the penthouse I use for appearances. You have a house and a penthouse? Sophie raised an eyebrow. That seems excessive. It is, Marcus agreed. The house is where I actually live. It's in the suburbs, has a big yard for the dogs, and a studio where I paint. The penthouse is for when I need to be Marcus Chen, CEO. It's basically a very expensive costume. That sounds exhausting, being 2 different people. It is, Marcus admitted. But I don't know how to be just one. The CEO has to exist for the company, but that's not who I am when I'm painting, or playing with my dogs, or reading science fiction novels at 3 a.m. because I can't sleep. Science fiction? Really? Sophie leaned forward, interested. Which authors? They talked for 3 hours until the cafe started closing and the staff began pointedly wiping down nearby tables. They covered everything from Asimov to Zelazny, from Renaissance art to street graffiti, from the challenges of teaching to the pressures of running a company. I should go, Sophie finally said. I have an early class tomorrow. Can I see you again? Marcus asked, then quickly added, just as friends. I just got out of something, and you're right that I need to figure out how to be one person instead of 2. Sophie studied him for a moment. Friend sounds good, but on one condition, you stop hiding. Be Marcus Chen, CEO who also paints. Own all of it. The money, the company, the art, the science fiction geekery. All of it. That's terrifying, Marcus said honestly. Good art usually is, Sophie replied. They met weekly after that, always at different coffee shops, always paying separately. Sophie treated him exactly the same after learning about his wealth as she had before, with warm interest in his thoughts and gentle mockery of his pretensions. She laughed when he didn't understand a pop culture reference, challenged his assumptions about art and life, and slowly became the first real friend he'd had in years. Meanwhile, Victoria's world was crumbling. The social embarrassment had been bad enough, but then came the business implications. Her father's real estate company had been counting on a partnership with a tech firm to modernize their properties. That firm, naturally, had been Nexus Technologies. The deal died the day after the interview aired. She tried everything to reach Marcus. She hired a publicist to rehabilitate her image, claiming she'd been deeply in love, but Marcus had deceived her. But the narrative had already taken hold. She was the gold digger, who'd been too blind to see actual gold. She dated other wealthy men, but they all knew the story. Some dated her as a joke, to say they'd been with the woman who dumped a billionaire. Others avoided her entirely, worried about their own reputations. Her social circle, never particularly loyal, distanced themselves from the scandal. 6 months after the breakup, she saw a gossip blog post about Marcus. He'd been spotted at a community college art show, buying several student pieces. The woman with him, the blog breathlessly reported, was a teacher at the college. They weren't touching, weren't obviously romantic, but the way they looked at each other while discussing the art suggested a connection that transcended typical CEO-teacher relationships. Victoria recognized her immediately, Sophie Martinez, whose social media presence consisted mainly of posts about her students' work and pictures of rescue dogs. She taught art to working-class students, lived in a modest apartment, and drove a 10-year-old Honda. She was everything Victoria had pretended not to be: genuine, unpretentious, passionate about something beyond status. The comments on the blog post were brutal. "Upgrade of the century! From fake to real in one move. This is what actual love looks like." Each comment felt like a personal attack, but the worst part was knowing they were right. Victoria did something she'd never done before. She actually looked at Sophie's art. The teacher's personal website showcased paintings that were raw, emotional, technically imperfect, but somehow more alive than anything in Victoria's carefully curated collection. One piece, titled "Authenticity," showed two people sitting in a cluttered cafe, so absorbed in conversation that they seemed to glow while the world around them blurred into irrelevance. It was dated 3 months after Marcus and Sophie had started their friendship. Victoria realized with a sick feeling that Sophie had painted what she felt, without even knowing if it would lead anywhere. That was real art, real feeling, real risk. A year after the breakup, Victoria attended a charity gala, one of the few that still welcomed her. She was standing alone, nursing champagne that tasted like regret, when she overheard two women gossiping. "Did you hear? Marcus Chen is engaged to that teacher." "The one from the community college? How did she manage that?" "Apparently, she didn't even know he was wealthy for the first 6 months they were friends. When she found out, she made him promise to keep taking the subway when they went places together, because she didn't want to deal with drivers and attention." "She made a billionaire take the subway?" "He seems happy about it. They're getting married at the community college, in the art studio where she teaches. He's donating a new wing to the school instead of having a society wedding." Victoria set down her champagne and walked out of the gala. The night air was crisp, autumn beginning to edge out summer. She thought about Marcus, about the way he'd looked at her when he revealed his wealth, hoping she'd be happy, only to watch her prove every cynical suspicion he'd harbored. She'd had everything she'd claimed to want, a handsome, talented man who adored her, and she'd thrown it away because the package wasn't wrapped in obvious wealth. Now he'd found someone who wanted the contents, not the wrapping, and Victoria was left with nothing but her family name and a reputation as the woman too shallow to recognize deep pockets. Her phone buzzed. Another text from another friend, another piece of gossip about Marcus and Sophie. She deleted it without reading and kept walking. Somewhere in the city, Marcus was probably painting in his studio, or walking his rescue dogs, or sitting in a cluttered cafe with Sophie, talking about science fiction and Renaissance art. He was living the life he'd always wanted, just openly now, without pretense or apology. Victoria had wanted a prince, a fortune, a fairy tale. She'd had all three and hadn't recognized them because they came dressed in paint-stained jeans. Now someone else was living her fairy tale, but it wasn't a fairy tale at all. It was just life, messy, authentic, complicated life, with someone who saw value beyond dollar signs. The city lights blurred as tears finally came. Not for Marcus. She realized she'd never really known him well enough to properly mourn losing him. The tears were for herself, for the person she'd been so afraid to be that she'd lost the chance to become someone better. 6 blocks away, in a small cafe that stayed open late, Marcus and Sophie sat across from each other, planning their wedding. It would be small, intimate, filled with her students and his engineers, her rescue dogs and his terrible taste in music. It would be nothing like the society wedding Victoria had probably dreamed of, and everything like the life Marcus had been afraid to hope for. "No champagne," Sophie was saying, making notes on a napkin. I hate champagne. We're having beer and wine from that place down the street from my apartment. The place with the questionable health rating? Marcus asked, smiling. That's the one. If people want fancy, they can go to someone else's wedding. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand, paint under both their fingernails, matching stains from the class they'd taught together that afternoon. I love you, he said simply. Even though I'm making you have your wedding reception in a community college cafeteria? Especially because of that. Sophie smiled, the same warm, genuine expression that had undone all his careful defenses. I love you too, all of you. The CEO, the painter, the science fiction nerd, the guy who tries to hide that he cries at dog rescue videos. I don't cry, Marcus protested weakly. You absolutely cry. They laughed, and somewhere across the city, Victoria Ashford stood at her apartment window, looking out at lights that had once seemed to promise everything and now only reminded her of what she'd lost by wanting the wrong things. The story had spread far beyond their social circle by now, becoming a modern parable about authenticity, superficiality, and the price of both. Marcus Chen had pretended to be poor to find genuine love. Victoria Ashford had been genuine in her shallowness and lost everything. Sophie Martinez had been herself from the beginning and gained more than she'd ever dreamed of. Not the money, which she barely seemed to notice, but a partner who matched her paint stain for paint stain, dream for dream. In the end, everyone got exactly what they'd been looking for. Marcus found someone who loved him for who he was. Victoria found the social embarrassment she'd always feared. And Sophie found someone who understood that the best art and the best love came from being brave enough to be vulnerable, honest enough to be seen, and wise enough to know that true value had nothing to do with numbers in a bank account. The wedding announcement appeared in the Times 6 months later. A small notice that Sophie had agreed to only because Marcus's board insisted. It mentioned the community college venue, the donation of a new arts wing, and the fact that the bride would be keeping her last name. It did not mention that Victoria Ashford spent that day alone in her apartment, finally understanding that she'd mistaken the performance of love for love itself, the appearance of value for actual worth. By then, Marcus had stopped thinking about her entirely. He was too busy being himself, all of himself, for the first time in his life. And that, he'd discovered, was worth more than all the money in all his accounts combined.